does one wrap their head around these figures? How do we ever think that we're going to get out of this debt? David, comments?
Well, I worry that the reaction, when it's appropriate, is going to be to increase taxes across the board. And I worry that that's the approach because so many people obviously have had tremendous financial uncertainty in the pandemic. And the last thing I want to see is the tax man show up at the door and basically take more of people's pay. What I can say is that there are some policies that could be done to spur growth. The Montreal Economic Institute report, I believe it was today, estimated that GDP growth would increase by over 3% a year if we got rid of interprovincial trade barriers. Now,
Right.
Ontario cannot do that for other provinces, but they can certainly do that for themselves. And so I would love to see a plan on that issue in particular to say, okay, Ontario truly is open for business. We're getting rid of all of these silly interprovincial trade barriers that never really should have existed. And we're going to rely, to some extent, on growth to help cover our budget deficits moving forward to try and narrow that number from 2029 downward. I think that that's the more sensible approach, and I think that that's something that Ontarians can get behind because everyone, and as Elliot has rightly pointed out, we're in the middle of a 100-year pandemic. These are unprecedented circumstances, as cliche as that sounds. So I think it just requires some vision on what we can do moving forward, so that it isn't just changes to tax policy that ultimately takes more money out of the pockets of everyday Ontarians.
Okay, so I appreciate what you said, and I completely agree with you that if we reduced a lot of the interprovincial trade barriers or even red tape in some circumstances, then we would truly be open for business, as Premier Doug Ford says. But I can't even think about being open for business when a good chunk of the province is simply locked down and is simply closed for business. And I think that is... speaking to some, lay Ontarians, they say, well, what's the point of even presenting a budget when we're simply not open? But I said, it's been 2 years, almost 2 years. We need to know what what the situation in our province is. And if we look at the interest charges on the debt that we're going to be paying, it's costing $13 billion a year. That's $1 billion a month we're paying to service our debt. And we have, as I said before, we haven't seen the end of this yet. How can we discuss GDP growth when we don't even know when we're going to be available, our province, to open to growth? Elliot, thoughts?
Well, I think that the economic plan that the government of Ontario needs to come up with probably involves a couple things. Unfortunately, I think part of that is going to be tax increases. I don't think that's avoidable. I think there is a sense across the G7 that taxes are being raised. You see the Biden administration's looking at it. We're doing the same thing in the UK. Whether that's a mix of personal and business,
Right.
We'll have to get there. I think you're also going to have to think about some growth programs to help spur economic growth and some select industries, whether that be advanced manufacturing, for example, and really try to start growing that. So rather than trying to claw our way back in the same size economy, we're actually expanding the economy. And that's, I think, what we need to do is try and think about what are some of those high growth areas where we can really drive some economic growth, create jobs, increase tax dollars across the board. You'll have to remember that last year in the second quarter alone, Ontarians saved $150 billion. So that wasn't the women and the folks who are working in the hospitals. This was probably from those who are able to work from home in professional jobs and who probably tend to make a little bit more income as well. Mm-hmm. Is there an opportunity to raise the taxes on those folks who frankly, I think have been doing pretty good during this pandemic and aren't the ones who are feeling the brunt of this? So I think there's a mix of things that the government needs to do to grow out of this, but certainly it's not an easy position, and the Ford government has a really tough hill to climb in the coming months and years.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about the potential of raising personal taxes. I know as we await the federal budget in a few weeks, there has been some talk about everybody paying their fair share, and what that would look like, I guess we'll have to stay tuned for a couple of weeks.